Good day, everyone, and welcome to the third webinar today. We're very pleased to have this series of webinars continuing, and we're very honored to have our expert panel with us today again, and have four speakers that we'll introduce you to in a moment. As we mentioned earlier on this webinar, the MEDINA webinar, the main objective is to work with those who are responsible and managing historic cities to shape up the framework of a new initiative, which we call the MEDINA Initiative of ICCROM, to see how we could start this initiative and the project based on needs assessment and understanding the situation from the experts that are with us today. And as I mentioned earlier, the fifth panel, which is two more to go, will be discussing, the framework of such an initiative based on the discussions and all the comments that we received from all of you. So thank you very, very much for joining us today. While, of course, the panel members will be discussing the issues we will be addressing today related to heritage economy and traditions and knowledge in historic cities. We will be also taking care of your comments that you will send to us via the questions and answer icon. So we will also address these. So please let us know of any comments or any priorities that you would like this initiative to address. Today, I'd like to introduce, and I am very pleased to introduce my dear colleague, Dr. Anna Paolini, to be chairing this session. Dr. Anna Paolini is the UNESCO representative in the Arab states of the Gulf and Yemen, and director of the UNESCO Doha office since September 2013. She joined UNESCO in 1992 as a specialist in the field of culture at the regional office in Amman, where I met her actually a long time ago. And from 1997, she covered several positions within the culture sector in the headquarters in Paris, including being responsible of the museum section in charge of the cultural heritage in the Arab region, as well as the response to the Second Iraq War in 2007. She becomes UNESCO representative and head of office in Uzbekistan, followed by Jordan before she joins the Doha office. And she holds a master's degree in architecture and another one in urban and regional planning for developing countries, a postgraduate degree in cooperation for development, as well as a PhD in urban and territorial engineering. Prior to joining UNESCO, Anna held a post of research associate at the Institute of Architecture in Venice, and worked in restoration of historic buildings in Italy, and carried out research in the field of urban rehabilitation in several Arab and African countries. She was also a recipient of scholarships to attend specialized courses and field work in France, the Balkans, Hungary, and Slovenia. Dr. Paolini is also a member of the International Council of Museums, ICOM, and the Italian Association of Professional Architects. Please welcome with me Dr. Paolini, who will be leading the discussion today, and I hope you will be enjoying the session today as we did in the last time. Thank you. Anna, please, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Zaki, and thank you very much for ICCROM to giving me this opportunity. First of all, I would like to welcome all the participants and the experts that are online with us. I would like, first thing to remember about the interpretation. If you look on your screen, there will be interpretation is mentioned in English and Chinese. It will not be Chinese, of course, but it will be Arabic. So please feel free, to express yourself or, change channel or express yourself in the two working languages for today. The panel will go on for the next 2 to 2.5 hours. We have four distinguished panelists that have joined us today. The topic, as my colleague Zaki has mentioned, is traditional knowledge and the economics of historic cities. To introduce, now we know that communities have used traditional knowledge and skills that have passed from generation to generation, and that had gathered in different places, given to the urban structure and the urban form a certain peculiarity. And this they have grown through ages and so on. So I would like just to mention, as I'm coming, and you have heard, I'm from UNESCO, the network that UNESCO has established in 2004, the one about creative cities, that I would say has picked up only maybe more in the recent years, and brings together cities that have invested and that have built their identity also around creative industries. And in particular, there are 7 fields of creative industries. There are 13 of the cities in our region, in the Arab region, that are part of this network. The majority are under the crafts field, which is the first one. And this might give you also an indication, on where the Arab region have invested. Nevertheless, we have 2 cities in the Gulf, Dubai and Mubarak, being a more recent city with different kind of identity, that have invested enormously in design and creativity and modern creativity, giving the space of a lot of artists to gather, to a lot of events taking place and so on. So how much this counts for the shaping of cities, what have counted in the past for the shaping of urban historic centers, and how this is translating today. What does it mean for the population that it leaves? What does it mean in economic terms as well? What are the benefits that the community living in these cities are benefiting from it? I think that the panel today would like to reply to a series of important questions, and maybe you can keep it in a little bit on the back of your mind. So, what aspect of traditional knowledge of living heritage can guide new construction plan and economic and social development? We know as well that the UN Sustainable Development Goals now are putting creativity and art and not only tourism at the core, and is making this linkage, and we will hear as well by one of the panelists talking about that. What are the potential the historic city have to sustain their economy? And what is the benefit for their community? And I would like as well, if the panelists can, and also the audience, can put everything a little bit in the context of what is happening to us today. We are not sitting together, we are all in different cities, we're all in different urban contexts, yet we are all linked together today in this panel. So the pandemics brought to us different way of communication, but also different way of creativities, different way of expressing ourselves, different way of looking at values. So how all this is translating or will translate as well in our cities and in the economies of the cities. I think it will be very interesting to listen from your talks, and also to listen from the panels about that. But without further delays, I would like to introduce the first panelist that we have here with us today. So Professor Oost is a PhD in economics from the Université Catholique du Leuven. And before that, he has studied and got his master's degree for Georgetown University and a certificate in European Studies from the University of Geneva. He is a professor at the ICCROM Brussels, the management school, and he was also his former dean. So he is a guest lecturer at the Raymond Lemaire International Center for Conservation at Leuven University. So he has been, teaching and giving a lecture in many places around the world. but in particular, he has been developed in the field of economics applied to cultural heritage since the 80s, and collaborated with the many universities and organizations, including my own one, UNESCO, ICCROM, that is hosting us today, and many, many other. Is also a former chair of the ICOMOS International Economics and Scientific Committee. His research and topics and expertise are on business cycle theory, heritage economics, and urban conservation. And how much is appropriate to start with you, Professor Host, today. So I will give you the floor. You have about 15 minutes, and then we'll pass to the next speaker. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you, Dr. Zaki Aslan also, and the organizers of ICCROM-Sharjah, and so on. I will share my screen so that you'll be able to tell me if there is anything wrong, but you should be able here to see the first slide with the title of my presentation that I will try to keep in 15 minutes, which is not that easy because you record a cultural economist, and I think that you will not be disappointed because I will speak about economics. But most of all, I will try to address the issue of the MEDINA project and to be more practical with starting with some example rather going back to some knowledge in cultural economics. And so the title of the presentation is Heritage Economics and Urban Conservation, and you will see that I will put a lot of focus on the historic urban landscape approach, which I believe is really something today that we should use more and more for addressing the issues of sustainability. So let me start with a quote. I like this quote about done by a Nobel Prize winner in economics, Robert Solow. Nothing is more important as the identity and livability of a place in bringing economic success. And this says it all. I think that the challenge is, of course, to take not the economic values and economic benefits as a separate thing from the cultural values and the heritage. The use of the cultural value and all the outcomes of the cultural values are basically social and economic and environmental also by se. So this is what I would like to show. In 2012, maybe some of you remember the book made by the World Bank, and I was lucky to contribute to it, The Economics of Uniqueness. I like this title very much because what we are trying to do basically is to, of course, is a challenge. Economics is sometimes applied, you see, to production, to some common goods being really similar one to the other, and sometimes we don't need them, but they still produced it, and we still buy them. But here we deal with something really about unique, and to make you saving a complete lecture on Econ 101 and of cultural economics, let me just show you today what is my vision about cultural economics versus urban heritage today. I see that really as a cultural, what I call a cultural ecosystem. Why a cultural ecosystem? Because that includes not or no more just the tangible built heritage, which of course was maybe the first step into conservation. But today we rely mostly on human-centered approach. We rely mostly on everything that goes beyond the building itself. But this is its use, this is the people you see who are linked to this building, and this is, of course, the intangible, which takes a greater and greater part in this definition. To me, this is very important to have this holistic view of heritage. Number two, we really realize today, and this is a trend around the world, that we require to have a mix between some expertise. Of course, we need the expertise because this is the guarantee about, you know, the Charter of Venice and everything about conservation. But we need also a participatory approach, not just a top-down process, but also a bottom-up process. And realize that if we want to be successful in conservation, we need to do that together with the people and especially with the local communities and the local people. This is number two. Number three, of course, is about what you expect from an economist, is to bring some values. And of course, there is a lot of the literature dedicated on the use, non-use values, externalities. You may have heard about that. Here, what I would like really to focus on is the fact that these economic values are not just economic, but they are sustainable. That means that they are good economic values if at the same time they are social values, environmental values, and basically sustainable. This is the agenda that we have today, as you know, about the Agenda 21, the UNESCO, and of course the SDGs. And finally, last but not least, and this is more maybe intricate in the economic definition, is that the cultural ecosystem is something that goes beyond the market. And this is sometimes difficult to be explained by an economist or to be understood by a non-economist. Going beyond the market means that the uniqueness of the heritage and the uniqueness of historic cities requires some specific tools. Of course, the market plays a major role there because you get a lot of private values, you get a lot of private users, you get some housing and real estate market, you get some shops, you get some commerce, you get some touristic activities, but the perspective is also going beyond that and to take more and more these historic cities as also a place where you find common values, where you have public values, and this is something that, as Anna said, will be probably related to the world, the post-pandemic world that we know, to have an emphasis on the local things and to share the things in a way that you see everything is providing a better quality of life for everyone. So these are, to me, the four principles. I would say that today we discuss a lot in cultural economics and heritage economics. So a cultural system, and I think that the project and the MEDINA project is about that because it includes this tangible and intangible heritage. It's of course try to achieve sustainable development through a local asking the local community about their perspective on that, and of course producing some values that are also common and public because we deal with heritage, and heritage is a public good by definition, not on a legal point, but on an economic point is something that we share basically, so it's a common and public values. So how can we address that? So this is the question that is that the MEDINA project should address this ecosystem through a human-centered approach. For example, taking crafts as both tangible and intangible assets. There is not just the craft and the craftsman, but also the place where he lives, where he work, and where he sell its goods. A consensus with the local stakeholders, and another thing which is more about management, but which becomes important, how to make money today with these users and with these historic cities, rather than relying on mass tourism, maybe and unsustainable issues. This is about innovative business solutions, but this is, you should invite me for another time to speak maybe about that. So what I does is to rely on this UNESCO recommendation of the historic urban landscape, to me, that gives this holistic, you see, and comprehensive vision, the different layers about the history of the place and the city, but also the different layers because of the different disciplines, the different fields of knowledge and of research that you address here. Applying the dual perspective in the case of the MEDINA project would suggest me to have a three-step process. The first question is to ask, what is the cultural capital of the place? What I call, and I was not the first, David Crosby did that before me, define the heritage as a cultural capital. That means this is something that will provide you in the years to come, in the future, a lot of flows of values, of income, and of jobs and of different economic values. So what is clearly this cultural capital? Number two, how can the local community and the local stakeholders perceive these assets? Number three, how can we take this cultural capital and check if it's in line or in phase with the urban factors? So this is more about urban management, I would say, but this is the way to prevent, you see, the cultural capital to remain something separate, with cultural values, with really important thing, but completely separate from what the real life is about the city. Let me just give examples of the three steps with a European project that we developed at ICCROM for the time being. It's an Horizon 2020 project, and I must say that I work with a very fine colleague that you may know, Dr. Ruba Saleh, who did a fantastic job and who still works with me on this issue. Number one, undertake a full assessment of the city's natural, cultural, and human resources. This is an example for the city of Salerno in Italy, which is a big city, but where you get some interesting historic question. We try to define the cultural capital of Salerno by mapping and identifying the different assets. You see on the map legend that we get tangible thing, but that we get also intangible. Mapping intangible to me is a very important thing, but you get all the cultural assets listed or not listed and all the natural assets. And then you discover that Salerno has a cultural capital like a portfolio, you know, very diversified with a lot of things that we can bring together. And this is an example of the map where everything is located. If you see my pointer, you see that, for example, the intangible are these different areas there with the dotted areas, which are the festival, which are some procession, the San Mateo procession. So you see actually where the intangible is related to the tangible, and at the end of the day, with the city itself. So there is a lot of documenting to define and just to describe this beyond just the description of tangible heritage. Number two is to use a participatory planning process with the local stakeholders. We did the same in Salerno, and we tried to map, you see, the different opinion, the different expression, and this is what we call a mental mapping or a perception mapping. This is to let the local community, you know, to express their view about that. For example, here you get words that has been selected by them. Another thing is to ask them about their perception of the cultural capital and of the cultural values, you see, of the city by what they hear, what they smell, what they say, what they see, what they taste, what they touch. And this, of course, takes a bigger, it's very powerful because it brings an awareness to the local community about what their city provides them actually, not just in cultural values, but at the end in social and economic values. So we made this kind of maps. We made also maps where participants were asked to identify what goes wrong in the city, the weakness, the threats, the things that they would like to see disappear, and these different things. A lot of information, of course, for the decision makers. The last point is about to see this economic landscape fact. How does all these cultural assets and cultural values go back with the urban factors? And to make that, what we did is to describe an economic value, an economic landscape which is made of urban factors that facilitate or hinder, you see, the generation of economic values. This factor could be, for example, the mobility, the accessibility around in the world, in the city, the provision of private and public urban services, land use regulation, tourist facilities, and so on and so forth. Just two examples. The first one here, we were focused on some building in Salerno that were being rehabilitated and to be find another adaptive reuse of this. And we look at the connection of that, you see, with some of the urban either strengths or weaknesses, with some the urban elements, or we can use these elements in order to develop and to have a better conservation plan. The same here, this is an example about all the area where tourist accommodations are located, where you get a concentration of things. So this is, again, a way, you see, to improve maybe the documentation beyond what is cultural values. I see that the time is running, so I come to my conclusion, and the conclusion would be just to take, you see, an example of that. If you look at this process, the very first step would be to identify on the different, through a mapping process and identification, the different crafts and the different craftsmen, the street artists, the food carts, everything that goes there, and it's not typically defined as a pure cultural, you see, asset, but it's still identified that through a consensus between experts and the local community. Then we see how this cultural capital is functioning, given the different, you see, urban factors. This is what I call the economic landscape. So the relevant questions are, if you take the craftsmen in the historic cities, where do they work? Where do they sell their goods? Where do they live? Who are their suppliers and customers? Why? Because it's important to have a local economic functioning, closed loops about that, so that the rewards comes back to the city and they don't go, you see, about unsustainable or foreign materials, recycled materials. What about the sewage, the water, waste disposal? So this is basically the sustainability of things that we go through practical indicators. This would bring of course, the decision of the master plan, of the conservation plan, of the investment, and the partnership with the local authorities, which is a next step, a follow-up in the historic urban landscape approach, by the way. The right partnership to do the private or public or private-public things that how do we keep the use of the building, which adaptive reuse, which business model can we use to make streams of income, which policy instruments, incentive taxation, which is regular, I would say, economics or financial instrument that we can use. And at the end of the day, of course, the objective is to create all these values based on sustainability, on the Hangzhou Declaration, 4-pillar, social, economic, cultural, and environmental. Which cultural values, which economic values, are they sustainable? how they can provide, of course, and sustainability, and so on and so forth. So it's basically a better documentation of things that comes back, you see, to the provision of economic and cultural values at the same time. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Oost, for sharing with us your vision of the pillars of cultural economics that I would like to remind for who arrive maybe later, and they can be interesting for our discussion later on, you know, to have this holistic view about heritage. I mean, I think that we went already beyond, you know, the tangible, the intangible, but now, you know, creative industries is also building in the participatory approach, the values, the common and public values, and also as well the cultural ecosystems that you mentioned should go beyond, you know, what is the value market, and to build up on the uniqueness of heritage that needs specific tools. And here also you called, you know, on the sustainable development goals and the role that they play today. Well, thank you very much, and thank you also for giving us the example of Salerno, that, by the way, is a big city, but it's also the largest province in Italy. So it's really the main cities of a larger basing of users, I would say, in the region. Without further delay, and thank you for keeping also the timing, for who join us late, I would like to remind you that you have English and Arabic translation, and there is a chat box as well, please, in English if possible, to have your questions for later on. But I would like to thank you again, Professor Oost, and to pass to the next panelist. I'm very pleased to introduce to you Mr. Kamal Musallam, which is an architect, but then now is it's here in a different role. I would say it's a role of a very known and important guitarist that plays oud in the field of jazz fusion. Having achieved quite a lot of knowledge, you know, in this innovative approach of merging jazz, rock, Latin, Indian, and Asian music with Arabic sounds and rhythms. So since you moved from Jordan to Dubai in 2002, you have released 6 very successful albums, including 2 official Grammy Award selections. So Mabruk for this. And you have collaborated with very prominent artists, just to name some: Sting, Yo-Yo Ma, and George Benson. So among others, you have performed in a variety of festivals, in particular jazz festivals, from Indonesia to Italy, to the United Arab Emirates, to London, South Korea, to name some. So your achievement has been also in musical instrument design that include the development of a signature model electric and acoustic Arabic guitars, so which quite impressive. After studying architecture in Jordan, you moved to France to continue and work in the same field with an advanced degree in design. But I think there you fall in love with jazz and you pursue different careers. Well, what a best combination to talk about, you know, creative industries and architecture and heritage and merging them into urban context. So with this, I will leave you the floor, and thank you very much as well for keeping the timing. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you so much, Dr. Zaki and all the ICCROM team for having me. It's a real pleasure to be part of this very unique group of people. I will try to keep the time. First of all, you have to excuse me because I don't come from a very academic background or research or conservation. So my terminology is a bit more simple, maybe, that I will be using throughout. Obviously, my architectural background plays a big role in my observation of things, as I've been doing a music career since 22 years now, and I have traveled quite extensively to play in festivals around the world, especially in Asia. Like I've done Indonesia 15 times, for example. So I've been exposed to a lot of heritage sites where most of these events take place, as well as in Arab cities, of course, and European cities. I've played so much in Rome, in Spain, in London, in France, etc. So in this presentation, I would just want to turn the attention a little bit to my observations, as I have played on stages that are 2,000 years old sometimes, you know, and I've noticed what's going on exactly in these sites, whether it's backstage, front stage, around the stage, around the site itself. So let me try to share my screen and my presentation here. Okay. So I suppose that each one of us living in those cities with such an important heritage have at least once in their life or once a year maybe attended one of those major festivals and have lived the experience of seeing beautiful colored lightings on the columns and on the details of whatever the Romans had built 2,000 years ago, and have listened to acoustics and sounds of musical shows, or have experienced walking through patios, watching art exhibitions. I'm sure each one of us have lived such an experience at some point and enjoyed this event, and have managed to somehow in the subconscious connect history with what's going on in the present time. And I just want to take a few examples here in the Arab world where we can notice that the major festivals in the biggest Arab cities are actually held at the Roman amphitheaters. For example, one of the most famous festivals here is Baalbek in Lebanon, which was established in 1956. Unfortunately, suspended through the civil war for 22 years and back in action in 97 until today. So you can see it's one of the most important festivals where some of the most important acts took place. The biggest artists, Lebanese and Arab artists, have played there since the 50s. And we can see how, the site itself is treated from a light point of view, from, organizing the crowds, the accessibility to the stage, or the accessibility of musicians to the stage as well. The lighting effects. Same in Jordan, we have a few amphitheaters in Jordan. One of them is Jerash festival held in Jerash since 1981. And notice in the picture here, for example, the rigging, the trussing that has been built. This is a point which I will come to later. I'm just now demonstrating the examples. Jerash festival is one of the most important in Jordan, every July happening also. Then in Amman, we have the big Roman amphitheater. We have two amphitheaters, one a small one and the big one. And every year also there is a summer festival happening there. You can see, and they're always fully crowded, fully loaded. Some big acts are coming. Here in Syria, in Bosra festival, which was established in 1985. Same thing. Similar design of amphitheater. This is Basra as well. And in Palmyra or Tadmur, also maybe smaller size theater, but the same concept. That's Palmyra. And this festival, I'm not sure when it was actually founded. Then we move on to Tunisia in El Jem World Music Festival, established in 1986. Very important festival as well. Jem World Music. We go to Carthage. Of course, Carthage is a big one, is a famous one, and also one of the oldest, established in 1964, accommodating, music from Arab world. Of course, most of these festivals accommodate acts from Arab world as well as from Europe and from the international music world. Carthage is huge. And in Algeria, we have the Roman site of Jamila, and we have the festival that is slightly recently established in 2005, a very beautiful one as well. It's called Festival Jamila. Jamila means beautiful. And then another important festival in the site of Volubilis in Morocco, established in 94, where it's mainly a world music festival as well, inviting different kinds of music from all over the world. So we noticed that most of these festivals held in such sites are mainly accommodating world music style. Of course, here I'm coming more from the intangible side of the heritage. So I'm involved mainly in the styles of music, genre of music. As Anna said, I try to mix Arabic music with other styles. I work on the bridging between cultures. So we noticed that these sites accommodate mainly that kind of music, the world heritage, whether it's pure traditions or mixed traditions. They are mainly held in those kind of sites, probably for the link, the historical links. But what I would just what I would like to point to here, major issues that I've noticed. First, in many of these sites, when you go to these festivals, you notice the social awareness. There's a problem in the social awareness of people about these sites and the monuments. It's kind of being taken most of the time for granted, as if it's a bunch of stones set out there, being there since they were ever born. And they don't understand, not everybody understands the value and the story behind those monuments and why it is important that they stay as they are, where they are, intact for generations to come. Secondly, the other issue that I have noticed from my experience, as you saw in one of the pictures, the rigging, the trussing that have been imposed over a building or a site that is 2,000 years old. So there's a lot of metallic structures that sometimes are built over these sites just for the sake of putting on special lighting or special speakers, because they cannot put them in different ways. So that's the easiest way to build those trussing over the site. And sometimes this causes damages, causes damages to certain parts, certain stones. And, the private companies or the sectors who take care of these structures, the technical structures, they don't really care that much. It doesn't really concern them if this site is being damaged or not. A third point that I've noticed, that many of these sites are only activated through certain times of the year, only during summer or winter, depending. And throughout the rest of the year, there's big time gaps of nothing's happening really. So the site is there only for tourists to come and visit. So I think, and here comes the economics, obviously, and how these sites can be better managed and better used. So my personal simple suggestions for these issues, number one is obviously trying to create more educational programs of different levels, and to provide these programs to all kinds of schools, universities, cultural centers in those cities where people are more aware. I mean, the normal simple public from all sectors of society are more aware about these sites, the history of the sites, the importance of the sites, and what everything means in the site, whether it's a building, an amphitheater, a column, a room, anything. Secondly, to impose a certain technical criteria to the private sector who is going to come and set up a festival or set up a stage, and to really sort of design systems, technical sound and light systems that are custom designed to each and every site, depending on what this site actually can take and what it really needs. And you know, in the Romans were really great engineers. So most of those amphitheaters have already amazing acoustics that are being studied by those who built them. So, for example, in many of the Roman theaters, there are focal points in the center of the stage, where if the band or the singer stands there, it is amplified way better than any other point in the place. So these are things that have to be highlighted and emphasized and transmitted to the technical people who are working today to set up those events, because they don't know about them. They have no idea that this exists. Third point is to help the authorities or the public sector or the organizers of events to have more activities happening. So probably they cannot make major festivals all around the year, but at least they can make smaller events happening all around the year. A programming for 12 months of the year, not only in 1 month in July or June, and that's it. So that the site is not dead in terms of culture, music and arts throughout other periods of the year. And the last point, and I'm trying to look at the time, is to probably from ICCROM or its affiliated partners to appoint a team, or probably there is already a team in each and every country, to monitor and administrate whatever has been mentioned before, all these programs, all these technical sites, all the educational programs, and to ensure the continuity of doing that in terms of keeping in order to keep those sites intact, and to help them live, or to assure a longer lifespan, and for them to be transferred to the next generations as they are now, with the same or in the same quality as we have received them, because we don't want to be that generation which destroyed those sites just in order to have fun in our own times or festivals. So these are mainly my points, and of course I have on the intangible side of things, I have created my own musical projects that you can probably check on my website, kamalmusallam.com. I have two major projects. One is dealing with the Eastern cultures. Since I'm in the Middle East, so I've divided my intangible music work into two sides, the East and the West. So I have created, on my website, you can see, these are my projects. I've created one project called Homemade in Rome, and that's basically tackling the musical elements around the Mediterranean basin, which is where the Roman Empire existed, and taking elements from that and making music with it. And there is a website dedicated to it. It's called homemadeinrome.com. And another project is called Eastmania. That's where I'm tackling the Silk Road cultures and all the cultures that Arabs have actually touched base with, whether it's China, Japan, Indonesia, India. And I've created another project called Eastmania. And Eastmania deals with the Silk Road, Eastmania, and the travels, the sailing to the East, tackling the roads of Ibn Battuta, Marco Polo, etc. And so I invite you to discover those if you like to dig into how I deal with the intangible heritage and how I mix things on my own plate. So that's it, I think. Thank you so much. I will stop sharing now. Thank you for having me again and listening to my little sort of complain about what's going on these beautiful sites.
Well, thank you, Kamal, very much for your presentation. It merged what I said at the beginning very well, you know, the creativity part and the creative industries, you know, with the use of historic landmarks. Believe me, there has always been a dilemma between the heritage practitioners and, you know, the local institution on the use of these cultural elements, whether they are in historic, in landscape, urban historic landscape, or archaeological. But you pointed out a very important things, because there has always been, you know, archaeologists against, you know, a local authority that want to make money out of it, archaeology that want to preserve, and so on. But you pointed out on a very important thing, which is education. And I think this is education and awareness is essential and an essential tool. And it has to start really, really at a very, very young age. My experience is, and it was a good experience, but it didn't bring the fruits as we would like. And it was exactly in your home country, I mean, in Jordan and in Jerash, where we had this attempt to this educational toolkits for school to learn about Jerash. And one activity was in particular about the theaters, to understand the role of theaters, from the architecture to the music, and connect it to the young generation so that they have appreciation and growing up with the respect, and then maybe going and enjoy, you know, music, but in a different, with a different perspective. So thank you very much for having highlighted that. I would like to remind the participants, we have 150 participants at the moment, that there is a chat box. I've seen that Professor Host has already replied to some. Please continue to do that so that we keep, you know, the conversation also in the box. So please do not hesitate also to pose question to our colleague Kamal. So I would like to, and thank you again also to you to keep up the time. So I would like to pass to our third speaker for this afternoon. I would like to introduce Dr. Fuad Malkawi, who holds a PhD and a master degree in urban and regional planning from the University of Pennsylvania, and a master in architecture from the University of Texas. He is a registered professional planner in Canada. His present profession as his position, he's a senior urban development specialist and spatial planning community of practice leader at the World Bank. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. He specializes in spatial planning and land development and urban design. He led the preparation of plans and downtown revitalization plan for several major cities in the Middle East and North Africa, South Asia, and also North Africa, and advise and serve as an advisor to several government and international organizations. He also taught architecture and urban planning at several schools in the Middle East and North America, and he published extensively and lectured on these topics. So I'm very pleased then to introduce you and to give you the floor. So please, Dr. Malkawi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks to Dr. Zaki and the team at ICCROM for inviting me to give this presentation. Let me first try to share my screen. Okay. So again, thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, basically wherever you are in the world, and I hope you are staying safe. As Anna mentioned, I am an urban planner working a lot with economists, because the target and the objective of most of the work that we're doing in the cities where I'm working is really to revitalize the cities and bring some kind of economic development to their deteriorating, in many cases, actually downtown areas. So today, actually, I'm going to be focusing on this topic, showing actually how in historic cores, heritage and historic sites can become really an urban asset, similar to any urban assets that you can capitalize on to really build the economy of that city. And probably all of you know that actually downtown revitalization is becoming key to economic resurgence of many cities. Following several, let's say, economic crises that took over many of the cities in the past several, really decades, looking back at the downtown areas as hubs and places where cities can be revitalized became really the trend, especially in the 90s of the last century and onward, where actually the treasures that are basically hidden within these downtown areas started to be discovered and actually capitalized on. And in many cases, this is happening mainly really in the Western world. Very few cities really in the regions where I'm working realize that. They're way back on that. That's actually where many of the programs that we develop come from and focus on, in the fact that identifying these places in order for them to capitalize on. Now, there are many benefits, and probably Dr. Oz talked a little bit about them early, but actually, aside from the economic impact of really investing in these assets in the downtown areas, there are other benefits as well, which includes actually improving the livability, improving the livelihood, and actually bringing back the people, and having all these type of social events and social interaction that probably was missing in many of these cities. But in recent years, the economic factor become really a major for these for decision makers in different cities, since really the downtown areas are often a burden on the local development on the local governments when they became kind of a tourist attraction in particular. From that perspective, the economy of these actually areas became more important for local governments. And the recognition of the value of historic buildings became more apparent, or it became more really clear to the decision maker makers at the local level in these cities. I'm going to show a few cases actually where we tried to look at this link between economic development and heritage sites in downtown areas and capitalize on them, while at the same time really trying to improve the livability of these areas and help the downtown areas to become more livable places. I want to start really from a study that we conducted in Saudi Arabia a couple of years back in support to the Saudi Commission for Tourism and National Heritage at the time. We worked with the colleagues from ICCROM, including Engineer Badr Hamdan, who's sitting actually on the panel. And the study was looking at different downtown areas of historic towns in particular. Some of them are actually major cities, some of them are secondary cities. I want to talk here about two of the cases that we looked at, which is Jeddah and Diriyah. In this case, I actually collaborated with a well-known economists, including David Throsby and Donovan Repkema, to come up with a way to assess and the economic impact of the investments that the government is made in Jeddah and was making actually in Diriyah, and show the value of that actually investment to the decision makers in particular, who mainly are really responsible or thinking of financing these projects. Of course, the study in Jeddah showed really rise in the number of visitors. And we're talking about non-Hajj, non-Umrah visitors who come actually during a certain festival that is taking place, an annual festival that is taking place in Jeddah on an annual basis. So there were like about 70% increase in the rise of the visitors after that festival started, and actually the city became a World Heritage Site and was improved. We were looking at 2 years from 2014 to 2016, where we also witnessed a huge rise in the number of hotel rooms that were actually starting to become available within the city, and an even increase in average room rates, basically, which is almost 9%, at a time when there was no demand for Hajj and Umrah. So when we're talking about 3.8 million visitors during these times, that actually is added to the other seasons in terms of tourism. So they are not Hajj or Umrah season. Now, in Dar'iyya, on the other hand, it was actually the investment is being made. So the idea was to show how just one additional night from visitors who already come to the city can actually contribute heavily to the local economy. So that additional night was based on really very conservative assumptions, which is, as you can see by numbers, included a small portion of the people who already are visiting Riyadh and Saudi Arabia who are willing to stay one more night just to check Dar'iyya, which was at the time, by the way, getting about 3,000 people before it even opened, 3,000 visitors to the restaurants that were open around Dar'iyya in particular. So the economic impact was obviously something to be thinking about when we're talking about 10 million basically dollars in lodging and about 4.77 million in food and beverages and about 8.38 million in shopping. And of course, the prices and the distribution of these sectors were taken from the trend at the time that has been doing. Similarly, in other cities, we looked at the same restoration process actually as an economic activity. When you restore an area, although you are putting some money in that restoration process, still that money is generating actually economic activities outside the process itself. So our study showed that every $1,000 that you put in restoration would generate really $857 in additional are generated outside the process itself. Every 10 jobs produce 1.7 indirect jobs basically, and 1.8 induced jobs, which actually means in different sectors, not related directly to the restoration. All these findings actually, the reason I'm sharing it, because actually SCTH at the time published part of the study in a book and actually put it on their website as well. So if you go to their website, or now I think it's the Ministry of Tourism website, you will find all these studies. Similarly, in Lebanon, probably many of you are familiar with the World Bank project. I mean, the World Bank support to a project there, which actually took 5 cities in particular with historic core, and the uniqueness of the project really, and where it interests me, the fact that it is an integrated approach. While there are historic cores, actually the project itself funded infrastructure work, upgrading basic infrastructure, traffic management, in addition to the rehabilitation process. Now, recently, a study of the economic impact was done for that, and it showed that every $1 invested in that project brought about $7 from the private sector as an investment. And of course, this is the key thing is actually how to get the private investors enticed and motivated to invest in these core areas, simply because this is not a job the government that can do alone. It is certainly not a job that we have to be left to big corporation. In particular, you have to bring really different categories of investors to these places in particular. The project actually had humongous, relatively speaking, direct and indirect effects. It introduced really additional jobs of 200 direct effects and about 250 indirect. And this is, we're talking at the time where political instability was still there. So that actually can give you an idea of the value of this type of investments once, of course, there is a political stability. And I must actually say now that these studies really are talking about pre-COVID, basically. So there is a lot of rethinking has to happen of what needs to happen considering the current situation. And I must say also that I'm happy this is the only session today where COVID is not the topic that I'm attending today, where COVID is not the topic, basically, of the session. I don't want to dwell a lot on salt as well, another case where actually the economic impact was apparent. Last week there was a whole session on salt, but actually it's also an integrated approach where development really included infrastructure, upgrading infrastructure, traffic, streets. It's more of a local development project, which actually focuses on capitalizing on the heritage assets and making the downtown area alive again and revitalized by investing in certain, in particular, actually, sites that probably are considered heritage because of the intangible part of them. Some of them actually because of the stories rather than simply the building. And this is important to realize that revitalization is more than just really investing in the buildings. It really covers all types of sites that are within a downtown area. It really covers actually the character, the tradition, the language, the craft, the innovation, all these type of things that might exist in a downtown area. So promoting the regeneration of downtowns and the conservation and adaptive reuse of their cultural heritage assets can improve livability and living conditions of poor communities. And the next cases, I'm going to talk about that actually. While making cities more competitive, enhance their capacity to attract private investments, which can then create jobs while making these cities more livable for citizens, for their citizens. So it is certainly for local development let's put it, a perfect model for local development. However, it's also a pressure on it brings pressure on local development authorities, because local development authorities are the ones who are going to be responsible indirectly or directly to the let's say, big impact that the investing in these areas would bring about. So for example, bringing more people, more tourists, that means pressure on infrastructure, pressure on actually on the municipal services, pressure on all of that. So in that sense, how to plan that and how to work with that is a necessity. Cities or downtown areas have to be ready to accommodate the change when they embark on one or other projects. There are trade-offs as well, and this is actually where the challenge is. So in many of the cities that we worked in, we noticed actually the opportunity cost is one of the major trade-offs that actually decision makers will be talking about, which actually means is that really investing in something in some of these sites might not be economically viable as actually building probably a new thing over there. Here comes actually the idea of the other benefits that these things bring about, and if I actually go back to Jane Jacobs probably 50 years ago when she said new things require old buildings. Of course, it's a statement that captures the atmosphere and the environment that you would probably want to have in these areas in order to attract people, basically. Other trade-offs probably include wear and tear effects. Probably Kamal mentioned that in talking about these theaters, which actually are being really abused in some sense by the events that are taking place. So there are few elements that are important, probably I took in order for a downtown revitalization plan to be successful. I have probably talked about history, the race of history and the historic preservation components, but there are other elements that are that actually are supposed to help really in getting the downtown revitalized and back to life again. Attracting the right population, having a proper vision of change, and the diversity. The diversity is the formula really, and the walkability and public space. And actually, I don't want to, since the time is limited, I'm not going to talk about every other one of them, but I want to talk about two projects that we actually have done recently in Pakistan, which actually mainly focus on the vision of change and the attracting the right people. So the current project that is under construction now that I'm actually leading is the Karachi Neighborhood Development Project. And in this case, while we are working in a historic core, our focus on public spaces. In other words, we are trying to put a vision to transform the whole city, which is a larger study that we have done, through transforming these public spaces and bringing life back to these spaces in the Sadr area, which is the historic downtown of Karachi. So the focus is on circulation and movement and probably creating activities that can be either during daytime or during nighttime, and at the same time encourage historic preservation and development within the downtown. I must say that actually now, considering the current situation and the coronavirus, we are also working with the city to develop new guidelines and standards for public spaces, considering actually the new norm that might appear after this crisis disappear. Since certainly interaction in public space is going to be different. Another thing, to attract the right type of population, you need to create the enabling environment. And this was actually the core vision for the walled city of Lahore, basically. And by creating the enabling environment, you need actually also to have that integrated approach where you not only really invest in the heritage building, but also invest in the city services and providing actually the type of comfort that people would have when they go to the suburbs in these cities. And this also works on attracting the right type of people. And the right type of people is not really about this person, not this person. It's about actually a diverse group that can really bring life back to the city. We're talking about, of course, mixed use as a start. And second, we're talking about probably innovative, basically, industries. We're talking about probably restaurants and cafes and apartments for people to live. In other words, we are trying to avoid the fact that revitalization is understood as bringing a major project, a stadium or a museum. In this case, it's really bringing the life to the cities the way it should be, some kind of a diverse life. So just to reflect on really the MEDINA program, I tried to actually list some of the lessons that we learned from the previous studies, and probably they are common in many of the cities, in the sense that if the MEDINA project is actually intended to support their cities, it is important probably to emphasize some of these lessons, which includes, of course, promoting urban regeneration and revitalization through integrated development. It's not only about really building a museum, as I said, it's more of an integrated development in these cities. And there has to be some kind of a strategic planning approach, and of course, ongoing implementation, monitoring, and evaluation, all through the process from implementation to operation. I mean, probably the other one is the fact that number 6, so that's what I want to mention, is ensure tourism delivers jobs and incomes to the communities. I mean, some of the places I've seen where tourism is actually an industry exclusive to a set of business people. In this case, it actually has to be part of the local development initiative, where actually jobs are really local, not really brought from outside. But the most important one that I want to focus on and actually conclude with probably is the community participation. Without that, probably you have a marvelous, wonderful projects, and I've seen that, without actually a buy-in from the communities that you want to attract. With this, I conclude, and I thank you very much for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Kamal, for walking us through different examples of urban revitalization of historic centers in different contexts. And thank you especially to conclude with the note mentioning and underlying the importance that the community has in the decision-making process, not only in consultation, but really into listening what they would like to do, because at the end, despite, there might be that revitalization attracts also different kind of inhabitants that might be, interested into settling there or investing there and so on. The local inhabitants, the one that have the ownership of this of that part of town, should be taken into consideration and listen to them and learn to them. I think they have also the historic memories. They have also a story to say. So I think it's as a professional in the field, is our responsibility really to put them at the center of the scene in what we are doing. So thank you very much again, also for having highlighted, the financial, aspect of investment. I would have some questions, but maybe later on, maybe a little bit provocative. But let's continue with our fourth speaker. And I'm very pleased. Sorry, if you can close the presentation in the meantime, Dr. Fuad, so that we can, I don't know if you are listening to me, so that we can move forward. But let me introduce our fourth speaker, Mr. George.
I'm listening.
Richards.
I closed it. I'm not sure.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. So Mr. George Richards is the head of Heritage Program at Art Jamil, the art and culture organization in the Emirates, where he is responsible for an initiative in Egypt, in Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and beyond. This in particular in the field of traditional crafts, but also architectural preservation and digital recording of heritage, something that we haven't heard yet today. He is a specialist assessor as well for the British government Cultural Protection Fund, and a trustee of the Prince Foundation and a fellow of the Society of Antiquaires of Scotland. He was the special rapporteur for cultural heritage, the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq, and a senior fellow of Iraq Heritage. So please, George, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to ICCROM and to Dr. Zaki for the invitation to present. So, so I think, look, I want to talk specifically about traditional crafts today, and I think it's been touched on in a few of the previous presentations. But maybe just to quickly introduce Art Jamil to those of you who are not familiar. Art Jamil is, as you kindly said, an arts institution based in Dubai, but working across the region, from Egypt and Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, in Iraq and elsewhere, focusing on a few different fields, from educational programs to heritage, which is my section, contemporary arts, and broadly a sort of collaborative approach. For those of you in the Emirates, the Jameel Arts Center is in Dubai and is a large contemporary arts civic institution. We also have the Jameel Gallery of Islamic Art, which is at the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. But I'm going to speak today about our programs primarily in Cairo and in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. And maybe to begin by sort of dispelling some myths around the role of crafts more generally in historical cities, and to hopefully kind of position crafts at this nexus of tangible and intangible cultural heritage and how they have a role in both sectors, which ultimately feeds into their economic impact. This is from, in Cairo, we have a center called the Jameel House of Traditional Arts in Cairo, which began more than 10 years ago as a collaboration with the Egyptian government, the Cultural Development Fund. And I know that we have Dr. Muhammad, who's previously affiliated with that institution on the panel, but also with the Prince's Foundation School of Traditional Arts in London. And it's really a school for Egyptians to practice traditional Egyptian crafts. And these are some of the examples of works that have been produced by the students over the years. And as you can see, it's a wide range from ceramics to gypsum carving, to woodwork, to brass work. And I think that when people think of the traditional crafts, this is often what they think of. They think of beautiful works, normally of sort of household wares, of tabletop decorations, of jewelry. And while that does have its vitally important role to play in the economy of historic cities, particularly insofar as heritage interfaces with tourism, one of the things that we've discovered over the years is that the basic traditional arts, the fundamental, the essential traditional arts, span both the design of products and indeed the fundamental principles of the built environment, of built heritage and building crafts. And through our center in Cairo first, and later I'll talk about Jeddah specifically, we've very much promoted this twinned approach, so that we are training craftspeople who are, on the one hand, able to produce beautiful works of, here, for example, copperwork, nahas, and brass work, but also to study and to understand the principles of the traditional arts as they are represented and manifested in the built environment. So it's a deeply immersed program in the heritage environment of, whether it's historic Cairo, and our center in Cairo is in Fustat. Here are two of our students studying designs and monumental pieces of traditional craftsmanship in El Ghuri Mosque. Again, another photograph. And then to think about how the same crafts that are conventionally associated with, say, works of product design can translate into not necessarily the sort of conservation, restoration of buildings, but the revival of crafts as a form of regeneration of the urban fabric. So here, how ceramic tiles can contribute to the revival of historic buildings, how glasswork, traditional glasswork, can on the one hand produce, yes, glasses and vases for the table, but also great works of chandelier and lamps that you see in the historic buildings of Egypt. Here are some examples of projects by our students, ranging from wooden doors to ceramic panels in the mihrab style. And this is an interesting example of quite an unusual marble dado panel from a mosque, I think again, El Ghuri Mosque in historic Cairo, that our students recreated, in this case with ceramics rather than marble, but the principles are the same. So thinking of craft not exclusively as a form of artistic representation in the design space, in the art space, but also as a form of artistic representation insofar as it can contribute to the revival of and regeneration of the urban fabric as a whole. The same is to be said in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, where since 2015, we have operated something called the Jameel House of Traditional Arts in Jeddah. The core program there is again a one-year diploma program with this is the Jameel House at nighttime, atmospheric shot. Is a traditional arts program with again the Prince's Foundation, who are based in London. And here, there's even more so than in Cairo, I would say, a deep relationship between the wonderful but historically in need of much restoration, the urban environment of Al-Balad, the historic district of Jeddah. The Ministry of Culture in Jeddah has commenced an ambitious and extremely exciting program of regeneration, of restoration of many of the traditional houses. And the traditional houses, you can see on the left, this is one of the more monumental in stature houses of Al-Balad. They're made from coral stone, and they have these beautiful Roshan windows, which are characterized by what they call mangur, this style of interlaced woodwork, which is quintessentially Jeddawi, and was a craft that was to some degree largely lost or practiced only by a handful of craftspeople. We teach this in our center. And if you look on those windows on the left on the house, many of them, the Roshan window frames are sort of boarded up with just bits of wood. And the idea is that as part of the regeneration, we will be finding new opportunities for the craft of mangur to be applied very directly into the regeneration of the traditional houses. Here's a piece that you can see is quite tired, and then next to it, a missing piece. And so a couple of our craftspeople in the Jameel House produced this beautiful work, which could then go back into that missing slot. I mean, that's an example of the kind of small scale, but you can see that the revival of the craft itself is now intended to lead to a supporting role in the wider regeneration and revival of the built environment. So this is some of the gypsum work that you can see around this doorway, this quite intricate gypsum work, which is common on a lot of the traditional houses in Al-Balad. And again, in our center, we've been teaching gypsum carving, similarly with a view to supporting the revival of Al-Balad in Jeddah. So I think the point is really here to position the crafts, as I said, at the nexus of both product design and art on the one hand, but also the revival of the urban fabric, and to think of them as deeply interlinked. And of course, historically, they would have been one and the same. But I think there's a tendency amongst the heritage sector, heritage professionals, to think of them as two distinct forms of heritage representation or acts of heritage. There's the intangible cultural heritage, which is craft as a means of producing bowls and glasses. And then there's the restoration and revival of the built environment. And we definitely think, as our Jameel, of those two approaches as in fact deeply interlinked. So this is an excerpt. Sorry, I missed a slide. No. Yeah, this is an excerpt from the inscription of historic Jeddah into the list of World Heritage in 2014, which actually talks about something else, which is the deep relationship between the trade and economic activity of the historic district of Jeddah with the cultural value of the city. And this picks up, I think, on what previous speakers have spoken about already, that the deep connection between those two those two acts, the economy and the culture, are interlinked and intrinsically held, and therefore very difficult for us as actors in the heritage space to seek to approach them separately. So for us, I think it takes us back to a few fundamental questions around what is the role of cultural heritage. Oh, sorry, I'll stick on this slide. So on the one hand, there's the role of the craftsperson and craftspeople as their contribution to the revival of the historic city. What does that mean? Well, on the one hand, as I said, there's the direct impact that craftspeople can have on reviving the built environment. Secondly, there's the role that craftspeople can play insofar as their works of design can produce economic returns and create sustainable livelihoods, the interaction of craft and heritage with tourism. Thirdly, and I think this is picking up on something that Dr. Fuad said in his presentation just now, the mutually beneficial relationship between the crafts and craftspeople and the economy. In other words, if craftspeople can achieve sustainable livelihoods through their practice of the crafts, whether it's linked to the revival of the built environment or the production and sale of craft products, that mutual beneficial relationship creates a greater sense of ownership, of participation, and involvement by the community. And ultimately then, and to this point in this slide, the fundamental link between the cultural value, its essence, its meaning, I think what Professor Ost called the cultural capital of the historic town or historic city, that linkage between the economic activities of craftspeople and the cultural capital itself of the old town is hard to overstate. So there are, I think, it's a deeply interlinked, intertwined relationship between craftsmanship, between the revival of the built environment, between the sustainable livelihoods of craftspeople as makers and sellers of craft products, of tourism, and of a sense of ownership and participation, of belonging, and ultimately to the very quintessential essence of the cultural value of the historic city that gives craft a vitally important place in how we think of our preservation and conservation of historic cities. That's all from me. I've kept it to be as short as possible to give time to questions, because I know that we've overrun slightly, but that's all from me. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much also for keeping the time. And thank you very much for highlighting the role of the traditional craft for regeneration of the urban fabric, but also to consider their, as a work of art, and at the same time as a way to provide sustainable livelihood as well for people by introducing them to the new generation through the project that you have established, in particular the one in Jeddah. That I was happy to visit and to see by myself on this traditional art program of 1 year that you have in this beautiful house, and how the education of the young generation to appreciate and see heritage and historic city through a different lens, and also apply this to their livelihood, which is also very important. That it becomes really something that they can live out of it, and they can transmit in terms of art and appreciation, and at the same time making use of it in the regeneration and the restoration of historic cities.